One organisation is putting the spotlight on the long-term mental health needs of children impacted by the bushfire crisis. Thousands of children have been affected by the devastation, which can have a harrowing long-term impact on their emotional well-being. The independent organisation called Save the Children says the psychological toll can last a long time, especially if kids are not provided with the right support. And for more on this, I'm joined by Save the Children Australia CEO Paul Ronalds. Paul, welcome to the show. Now, we've just heard the announcement the Morrison government will roll out $76 million in funding to support the mental health of bushfire victims. What is the right support for children, and how important is addressing mental health needs to young Australians?
It is very, very important that we do support the mental health needs of children. Bushfires, disasters like bushfires can be very, very traumatic, and the research shows that anywhere between 7 and 45% of children impacted by a disaster like a bushfire can suffer depression. So it's very important that we take this seriously and that we act early. We know that children are very, very resilient, and with the right sorts of support, they will bounce back, and that's exactly what we want to see happening in response to these bushfires.
Yeah, absolutely. So much uncertainty for children. So, Paul, how is your organisation supporting children at the moment?
Well, the first thing that we need to do is make sure that really what we call psychological first aid is part of both the evacuation centres and the recovery centres. So Save the Children is currently operating in a number of evacuation centres. In fact, even today we're expecting to start up in Bega and Batemans Bay recovery centres to make sure that children are not only receiving that psychological first aid, but also that their parents have somewhere safe for them to be able to leave their children, knowing that they will get the sort of professional care that's really important as part of recovering from a traumatic event like a bushfire. We've seen many reports of long lines and quite significant amounts of time required for parents to work through the administrative issues, insurance, applying for relief funding and those sorts of things. So again, it's not just helping the psychological first aid of children, but also helping their parents as part of that process.
And we all cope so differently to such a crisis as well, don't we? Save the Children have responded to some of the tough places in Australia and around the world. Can you give us an example of some of the long-term support that children will need from the bushfire crisis?
Absolutely. So Save the Children operates what we call child-friendly spaces, the sorts of things that we're doing in the recovery spaces here in response to the bushfires. We do that all around the world in response to cyclones and other natural disasters. The child-friendly spaces start with trained early childhood workers and teachers, making sure that children are given a safe space. We know that for children's recovery, getting back to a routine is really, really important. So even things like resuming homework and those sorts of things, that's not relevant here in Australia at the moment, but very, very important that children feel safe, that they're getting back to normality, that they're able to really talk about the experiences that they've been to. And I would encourage parents, guardians, teachers to make sure that they are creating spaces for children to be able to express the sorts of feelings that they might be having in response to the bushfires, and create space, including when school goes back, in class for those sorts of discussions.
Yeah, you make some really good points there, especially about, as you mentioned, communication and having that routine. And in September, you released your top 10 tips for protecting children during the bushfire season. Where can people find this, Paul, and what advice are you providing?
Well, the top 10 tips is on the Save the Children Australia website, so I'd encourage your listeners to go to there if they're interested in those sorts of things. They are fairly straightforward tips. They're sorts of things of being really alert to the psychological impact of bushfires or other disasters on your children. If you are concerned that they might be experiencing trauma, if you are concerned that they might be experiencing some form of depression, really encouraging them to open up and to talk about their feelings. And of course, if those conversations do suggest that they are suffering from some sort of mental anguish, psychological stress, then you should speak to trained professionals in relation to that. As I said, children are very, very resilient. With the right sorts of support, encouragement, they can quickly bounce back, even from a disaster of the sorts of magnitude that we've seen in Victoria and New South Wales.
Because sometimes people don't feel like they want to cry or they should cry, but it is okay because obviously we're going through such disastrous conditions, and as we mentioned before, people just cope so differently, don't they?
Absolutely, and often in the, with all of the other pressing demands that parents and others might have, they can sometimes ignore not just their own mental health well-being, but also that of their children, or think that they'll deal with it down the track. But actually we know that the earlier that we start to address the mental health issues, particularly of children, the more likely it is that they'll make an absolute full recovery. So it's really important that adults around children are really alert to these sorts of issues and act early and act decisively to make sure that we avoid any mental health issues associated with these bushfires, especially on children.
Yes, we really need to look after each other, don't we? And we've been seeing a lot of that as well. We've been seeing the generosity of so many people providing what they can, whether it's a small donation, a large donation, a lot of fundraising. So it does really bring out the best in a lot of people. But as you said, we do really need to be mindful of the mental health of children, adults, and of course with the Morrison government rolling out that $76 million campaign. It's certainly well needed.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. That website, savethechildren.org.au and /bushfires for the tips. Thank you very much, Paul Ronalds, for coming on the show, CEO of Save the Children Australia. Thanks so much for your time, and I really wish you and your organisation all the very best, and thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you.